perimeter.
What's happening, guys? James Blonde here with MMOHuts.com. This time taking a first look at Transformers Universe, a browser-based, that's not too browser-based, action third-person shooter battle MMO from Jagex. They call it a MOTA, which stands for Massively Online Tactical Action Game. Now the game runs in an advanced version of the Unity engine, and it's playable in the browser, or you can download the client and basically forget you're playing a browser game. So the game just hit open beta on July 4th, so anyone can sign up and try it out, but I'll hop in and show you guys what to expect so far. So, Decepticons or Autobots, what faction are you going to represent? That's the first question you ask yourself when you sign up and download the game. The good news here is that you can be both if you choose to, but you've got to progress independently on either side, of course. There is a certain process to being able to select between the two if you want to switch. You've got to make two different commander names. Not two accounts though, that's the confusing part. You do this from the Transformers Universe website. After you sign in, you can switch sides back and forth. Also, once you've logged in, you can look over your gameplay stats, which is something you actually can't do in the client itself for some reason. Maybe that's something I'll add in later on. But after you created a commander name for both Autobots and Decepticons, when you log into the client, you have a choice on which one you want to play when you start up. I figured I'd mention this because it was a little bit confusing right at first, and it doesn't exactly tell you. But anyway, moving on, starting with the Autobots, you get thrown straight into a tutorial that lets you learn the basics, how to transform, how to move, and switch weapons, of course. For this, use Monsoon, which by far is my favorite starting Autobot. He's got a chain gun, a grenade launcher, and a two-handed axe. And if you ask me, I'd say that's a pretty good combination. But each Transformer has 3 different weapons and 3 different abilities. Now, the abilities generally are buffs or heals that you can put on yourself. Like, for example, with Monsoon here, you can use his 4 to increase the damage of all 3 of your weapons by a certain percentage over time. His 5 lets him heal over time while still staying active in combat, and his 6 gives him a sprint, basically, that increases his movement speed by 70%, which is a pretty good amount. When you transform into your vehicle mode, you can still fire. In his case, he uses his grenade launcher. Plus, you get 1 ability and a special combat move that's pretty useful that not only transforms you but also helps you initiate combat, so it gives you sort of a buff. Like in his case, it deals a little bit of AoE damage. Now there's also one more aspect to the weapons in general. Each one you switch to allows for an alternative fire that they call S-Tech, and these kind of work like another set of skills entirely, mainly utility. For example, Monsoon's Chain Gun's S-Tech gives him Healing Rain that puts down an AoE of health for him and his allies, and it allows him to remain engaged in combat. Pretty helpful for healing the group. His Grenade Launcher's S-Tech fires a round that immobilizes enemies. It's perfect for when they're trying to get away, and you decide that that's probably not the best move for them. And finally, his Axe's S-Tech gives him a mid-ranged whirlwind attack that does massive amounts of damage. Now, the S-Tech charges up as you use each weapon, and most of the time you can charge them to all the way up to 2, which makes them either deal more damage or crit heal in the case of the Healing Rain. So you can start to see that each Transformer has a lot to offer in terms of abilities, weapons, stats, and overall playstyle. Oh, and each one also has a subsystem which works as their passive. So, for example here, Monsoon uses Mutual Affection, so any Autobot that heals him gets an armor buff. So with the various ways the characters are structured, they work really well in team-based situations, as you can probably tell. But what I didn't particularly like about the tutorial is that it showed you how to move, which is pretty basic, W, A, S, and D, looking around with the mouse, transforming into car form with T, switching weapons, and using abilities with 1 through 6. There was never really any explanation of what the abilities did or anything to do with the S-Tech. In fact, I didn't even know the S-Tech existed until a couple matches later. I guess that's something that they'll add in later, but my suggestion for now is to check out the individual tutorial videos in the hangar to give you a little bit better rundown on each of the Transformers. They're actually really helpful. But after the tutorial, you're given 2 additional Autobots along with Monsoon. You get Overclock, who is categorized as a Demolisher. He's powerful at long or short range, wielding a rocket launcher and a laser rifle that fires a nearly constant beam of energy. It's pretty cool. He's got a couple of ways he can heal himself, but only himself. He doesn't heal the group. Overall, he brings the damage in, but doesn't necessarily give up his defenses. So his 6 allows him to absorb damage for a little while, which is really nice. And you also get Triage, the support healer, who can reflect back incoming damage with one of his abilities and can of course heal himself and allies. Not necessarily my favorite class to play, but he's definitely a good medic. Now here is where I tell you that the tutorial and the 3 starting Autobots have nearly identical Decepticon counterparts. Except the Decepticons, in my opinion, look a lot cooler. Both their Transformer forms and vehicle forms, honestly. But literally there is a direct match of Autobots to Decepticons with the starting Transformers anyway. You've got Drive-By, who corresponds with Overclock, Rampart, who is almost exactly like Monsoon, and Hotwire instead of Triage. Hotwire transforms into a pedo van, though. They're all set up with the same weapons, and there are only slight differences between them. For example, instead of the healing rain that Monsoon has for his S-Tech on his minigun, Rampart heals by absorbing energy and getting all the health buff at once. The drawback is that he isn't able to engage in combat while doing so. And there are several other examples of the differences, but basically they end up doing the same thing, just maybe in a slightly different way. But overall, the balancing between the 2 factions matches up nicely, and some of the Autobots and Decepticons you can purchase down the road may have different weapons and skills than their counterparts. However, they want the PvP balanced out, so they have to be comparable and fairly equally weighted. Now, one difference between the Autobots and the Decepticons is the base area. The sort of social area where you can go to the hangar to view your Transformers and change up stuff. And I'll get to that in a little bit. This is also where you queue up for PvP or leave to join in missions or go to the open world area. You'll notice here that you can see the current battle outcome of the 2 factions. Decepticons are winning, of course, solely on the fact that they look cooler, but there are 2 primary parts of the gameplay in this game. You've got PvP, of course, which has 2 game modes currently, Meteor Shower and Elimination, which is Domination and Team Deathmatch, respectively. So Meteor Shower is actually really fun, especially since you can transform and drive over to the various points to capture. Otherwise, it's a pretty straightforward domination match. And of course the point locations change, so it's not all the same all the time, and they capture really quickly, so it's a fairly fast-paced match. If you can coordinate with your team, you can win really easily. I kind of like chasing enemies, keeping them away from our points, hunting them down, and brutally killing them. Which, oddly enough, doesn't seem like a tactic they were expecting. The Elimination game mode, on the other hand, is your standard team deathmatch with up to 4 players on either side going for the first to 20 kills. And once again, if you have good team coordination and a good team composition, you can dominate pretty easily, especially against fresh players, which happens to be fairly often because of the game's sudden transition over to open beta from the founders and closed beta. I can say it does take some time to get used to the skills, weapons, and S-Tech for even the first 3 playable Transformers. See, each bot has 2 health bars, essentially. You've got a shield and spark. Now, the weapons do specific damage to either or both. They call it omni damage if the weapon does equal damage to both shield and spark, which makes sense, they just don't really clarify on that. So yeah, some of the weapons are more effective against one or the other, therefore causing you to have to switch back and forth accordingly. Plus, each weapon has various ranges they are effective at. And then of course you've got the skills that typically aid your weapons in some way or the other, not to mention the S-Tech as an alternate fire. So I would say, until you get your bearings, expect to die a lot in the beginning. Your first couple of matches are probably going to feel like they're one-sided. That's how it felt for me anyway. Plus, every time you return to base, you are auto-queued for PvP. So I think a lot of players are just expecting that that's the first thing they should do and not getting any sort of experience with their Transformers before they just go and get their ass handed to them. So my suggestion on that, besides checking out the overview tutorials in the hangar, is to check out the other half of the game, which consists of an open world area. Different for either faction, of course, but both have persistent missions that you can join up with random players or party with in order to fight the Terracons, which are basically zombie Transformers or something along those lines. And this open world area is set up a lot like Marvel Heroes in a sense. Now, various missions can be anything from repairing NPCs to taking out these turrets that actually hurt a lot, to destroying mini-bosses, which can also drop items that work as consumables that buff you up a lot like some of the skills can. These are the same items that you can find in the cash shop or the engineering station, but I'll tell you guys a little bit more about that later on. So the open world area can be a great place to farm for these items, as well as Energon, which is one of the in-game currencies, as well as get familiar with your Transformers abilities, like I said before you try out the PvP. Also inside the open world areas, you've got 2 co-op PvE instances called Crisis Missions, and this has you and 3 others taking on wave after wave of enemies while you work your way to the next area of the map. Now these maps can take a little bit of time to complete, but you get a boatload of items as a reward, especially after taking down the raid boss halfway through the mission. Plus, killing all these enemies gets you a ton of Energon, so this is a great way to collect that. So currently there are 2 different maps for the Crisis mission, depending on what side of the open world map you enter at, and the mission is exactly the same for both the Autobots and Decepticons. So for now, there are about 12 different Transformers for either side you can choose from, 3 of which you already have unlocked for free, 3 more that can only be obtained by purchasing Founders Packs, and the rest you have to purchase with relics that you collect by completing missions or purchasing with real cash currency. As you work your way more over to the right, you'll see that the relic cost does increase quite a bit. Duststorm and Shellshock are close to 2,000 relics, Conduit is close to 4,000 relics, and Mismatch and Flatline are pushing 6,000 relics. The same pricing goes for the Autobots as well, and from what I've noticed, you only get about 40 relics for doing well in a PvP match. The Crisis missions get you about 25, so you can see that you can work your way to getting a new Transformer just by playing the game. It's just going to take you a little while. Otherwise, like I said, you can buy relics with real currency. You can get 1,000 for about $5 or 24,000 for 100 and anything in between. So if you didn't have any relics earned from gameplay, it would cost you about $30 minimum for the most expensive Transformers like Mismatch and Flatline for the Decepticons as an example. And hopefully as they add in more bots, they'll offer up a free rotation system so you can try out some of the other bots before having to grind them out or feel the need to drop the cash for them. Now you can also spend relics to change up the color scheme on all of the Transformers with resprays, basically the skin system in the game. It's a really cool idea, but honestly I think it would be better if they set it up so that way you pay a price and then can select a color scheme yourself with color wheels. Or even if they had a system similar to Warframe where you purchase the various color palettes to use. As of right now, the cooler looking resprays are the ones you already have unlocked anyway. You can also purchase consumables and augments in the cash shop. The consumables are the same as the ones you pick up when playing in the open world or on the Crisis maps, for example. They pretty much give you a buff for several seconds, or in this case, it disorients the enemies for a short period of time, or some of them repair you over time. These you equip specifically in the hangar before you deploy your Transformer, and then you unlock more slots to equip more consumables as you level your individual bots. Now, augments are more like boosters that increase your shield or damage output for longer terms, more like 48 hours as an example. Now, you can buy these consumables with Energon, which is another form of in-game currency like I mentioned before, that is found a lot more often than relics, but you do that in the engineering spot. You can see that you can select these items and build them with Energons and not have to use relics, but it does take place over a course of time, so that's kind of the drawback. You start it, takes about 4 hours, and then you get your items. Or, like I said, you can just buy them with relics here as well. Once you've leveled up your account and gained experience on your individual Transformers, you can then tune their stats by adding attribute points to these stats and increase them ever so slightly. And as of now, the matchmaking in the PvP matches isn't set up to not put lower level players with higher level players, so even the low level players can actually fare up against a higher level player if you're working in a group and put in the skills, of course. The point is that these stats do make a difference, but the gameplay tactics themselves help balance it out in PvP. Otherwise, guys, that's a pretty good rundown on what the game currently offers. There's a lot I like about it, but there's a couple of things that I think holds it back for now, like the price of the Transformers if you want to spend cash on them, or the fact that it can take a lot of grinding to unlock one otherwise. The way the Transformers are set up with their weapons and skills is pretty cool in my opinion. It's awesome being able to transform back and forth on the fly, so the game is fun. I can see some players getting discouraged at first, seeing that the game auto-queues you for PvP, so you feel the need to do that first and, of course, get your ass handed to you. I can say that you do forget you're playing a browser game, but the load times can be a little bit longer as a result. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. The game is definitely worth a try. It's an open beta now, and you can get more information at the game profile at MMOHuts.com. But until next time, guys, that's going to be it for me. I'm James Blonde. See you out there, gamers.